Wakefield, it's the Nolan Current Night Show, where you join Nolan as guest this week, Geoffrey Cushing Murray, to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the program. Joining me this week, if you know your Beach Boys history, if you're a true fan of the work that they put out, you have a good ear for music, like myself, one of my favorite, if not my favorite album that they put out there. This man wrote nearly half the album with one of the most legendary musicians who could sing the phone book, as they say, Carl Wilson. He is the one and only, coming from sunny Los Angeles, California, Mr. Geoffrey Cushing Murray. Geoffrey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Well, this is a true treat for me, and I'll say this why, because I grew up in liking the oldies type of music. Grew up with Kenny Rogers, Barry Manilow, that type of music, and I heard the Beach Boys, when they had the Full House show and they were doing reruns, and
John.
They were appearing on that, and I heard Barbara Ann, and I think it was Kokomo, and it was Dennis's song Forever. Those are the three songs I heard on there. I wasn't a huge fan, but as I got into college, I started to listen more and find more of the stuff that just wasn't the surface that you hear maybe at the current version of the Beach Boys shows, where it's just the greatest hits. And I soon came to find the album that you wrote with Carl, and what we'll talk about today, the LA Light album. And it's one of the first few I got in my record collection. And I had recently seen Al Jardine at one of his shows, and Bobby was there, Figueroa, and I had him sign it. And Matt Jardine was there playing also with his father. And he said, "Oh my gosh, I remember when this album was put together." And as I'll say later on, there's some good songs on there. You had part in those good songs, and the other songs, I'm sure you know the ones that maybe I'm alluding to that may deserve to be in other albums or not be on there. But I digress. So
maybe shouldn't have been made in the first place.
Sure, yes. There are some that are questioned. This whole week, or the week leading up to this, I've been just familiarizing myself with just sort of the album again. Although it's not like I got rid of it, but there's some of those songs on there I have to really grit my teeth listening to certain ones that aren't as favorable as others. But I digress. Obviously the last few years of the world basically have been really interesting, have been weird, have been crazy and wild. And how's life for you going so far? It's recently, but the last 2 years.
Pretty good. The COVID has sort of made things difficult, but I've been healthy all through.
Sure.
I imagine I'm immune. That's what I'm thinking, but I'm never going to get it. But I'm retired. I've been retired for 5 or 6 years now, so It's a very cool life. Been doing some, did some traveling, and we traveled even as soon as anybody started traveling during COVID. We said, okay, we got to move now.
Yeah.
But it's it's a difficult time for everybody.
But even with musicians, it's been really tough to now they're getting back out on tour and that sort of stuff. So it's sort of good to see that. Hopefully things can stay rock.
Well, half of the music today is like recorded by people at home.
Sure, yeah.
So, with their Pro Tools and stuff like that. They don't need to leave the house anymore.
Of course, yeah. Then they can be real hermits. I want to ask you this, just as a curious question. You had done I shouldn't say recently, but 2 years ago, you had done an interview about this album and sort of your career in music on the Surf's Up Beach Boys podcast 2 years ago. Right. And you mentioned how you had written part of a song that will never see the light of day. Have you written any music, music during this time?
I fiddle around.
Sure.
I start stuff and I don't finish it. I said, well, if I really had ambition and I really, wanted to go through the torture of creating stuff,
sure.
I could still do it if I really had, but I don't have to. So
sure.
I could write a chorus or a verse and say, yeah, I could do that. Yeah, sure. But it's a tough racket.
Sure.
I mean,
I'm sure I'm not musically gifted at all. I played saxophone in middle school for all of 5 seconds. So whatever skills you have are vastly superior than to whatever I have. I want to sort of start with this. You mentioned, growing up in that same interview and doing research, growing up in Puerto Rico and then living in New York and then finally moving out to LA. When you were growing up, whether it was New York or in Puerto Rico, how much of an influence did the music of the Beach Boys that you helped sort of create some of it have in your life in terms of not just being a fan, but, thinking, what if I got into it?
well, I used to, I had conversations with Carl, and I said, well, I grew up with the Beach Boys
Sure.
music, and Carl said, yeah, so did I.
Yeah.
We're the same age. And
Yeah.
I was familiar with it. It wasn't, like the most popular
Sure.
music. I mean, I can remember, like being knocked out by All Summer Long.
Yeah.
It was just like I played the hell out of that. But I was very much into music when I was a kid.
Sure.
All kinds of rock. Well, when I lived in Puerto Rico, it was hard to get your hands on anything.
Sure.
We would do stuff like take a car and go out to some remote place where we could pick up stations from the States and hear some rock and roll.
Sure.
And then I was in a band. My first band was when I was like 15, and that we had one song, and it was "Ya Ya" by Lee Dorsey, and I said that was my. It fell apart shortly thereafter, but it was fun. It was the first step.
One of Brian's bandmates, and they deem him the musical secretary, who's been there since he's sort of gone back out on tour. Darian Sanaja has talked about in other interviews about how when he was growing up, at the time he got into the Beach Boys, that it was sort of a sin to listen to them, that he would get beaten up listening to them when he was a kid in Southern California. What was the general consensus of kids your age, wherever you were living at the time, of their music?
Well, I don't much recall. I mean, I don't think it was like uber popular. I mean, there was,
Sure.
There was no surfing in Puerto
Yeah.
Rico, and there is now, apparently, but in those days there wasn't any. I don't remember people being really fascinated with the Beach Boys that much. Maybe when I was in college.
Sure.
That was the Good Vibrations era, so
Yeah. Oh, of course. Yeah.
Vibrations was like like from heaven,
Sure.
and so the Beach Boys were there was the competition between the Beach Boys and the Beatles,
Sure,
actually. We were they're our American band, and there's the British guy. Yeah. Those were great times.
Sure. Well, and you look at it, and I forget what the documentary was, because there's been a gajillion documentaries and movies and TV movies made about the Beach Boys. But I think Fred Vail, their one of the original, if not the original manager, had mentioned how at the time, it was during Sunflower, how they weren't hip anymore and how they wanted to play the Beatles type of stuff. And then you look, when the interview was done in 2004, the Beach Boys are still here in the various factions and situations. You mentioned All Summer Long when you were growing up, having an impact on you, listening the hell out of it. When you got into college, I don't want to say viewpoint, but did your musical appreciation, not just listening to what they were producing, change?
Not really. I mean, I've followed the progression,
Sure.
So it was, if it's good, I liked it,
Sure.
I didn't have any kind of prejudices against it, being surf music or anything like that.
Sure.
I don't know what else to say about that.
Well, you mentioned it. You mentioned that into your surf stuff, and I'll go back to it from time to time. But you mentioned how when you were writing with the Beach Boys for LA Light album, how your stuff was a little bit more, I think, to the heart in terms of powerful, moving, the message that they was creating, and it wasn't just, I think, baseline stuff. when they were putting out the music, when they were changing from the surf, the cars, and the girls and the summertime stuff to the more, introspective, personal, feelings type of stuff, did you gravitate to that a lot, seeing as you sort of rent that more?
No doubt, yeah. But I mean, that kind of stuff was in Girl Don't Tell Me,
Sure.
and songs like that.
I want to speak briefly upon that, the change in the music that they were putting out there to the more, not just the surf stuff. It's known that critically, people, they didn't always maybe appreciate that. The fans maybe didn't appreciate this. Well, now, obviously, years later, similar to LA Light album, it's more appreciative. From your perspective, when they were going to the Pet Sounds, where it changed from the surf stuff, what were your first thoughts hearing that? And were you someone who moved to that immediately?
Oh yeah. I have excellent musical taste. I don't know if you know that. I'm well known for my musical taste, so it was good, and I was pushing it. That's for sure.
You went to UCLA, majoring in English upon doing research. Besides, I know you had mentioned that you wanted to become an English teacher, possibly with that degree. Any other career options in terms of maybe even music or anything else revolving around that, or were you hell bent on English teacher?
Well, I wasn't really hell bent on English teaching. I was studying English and I was writing poetry.
Sure.
It wasn't bad poetry. My professors kind of liked it and stuff like that. And I can remember being out by the sculpture garden talking with my favorite professor, and saying, well, maybe I'll go on and get a graduate degree and teach English. And he said, don't do it. But most of the kids that are coming here are looking for a place to park their car. And you should do something with your talent.
Sure.
And when I was in college, then I got back into a band at UCLA. It wasn't very good, but somebody asked me and want to be the singer in the band, and I said, yeah, sure, why not? It was semi-embarrassing, but it got the ball rolling for me.
Sure. For you, going to that, going from school to then music, where it takes work, and you mentioned that in the interview where you were struggling for a while after going to school as an artist. How all in were you and confident in yourself that you would make it in the music industry and have some sort of success in it early on?
Yeah, well, I was not a really ambitious person. I mean, I had artistic intent, I think, so and since I got kind of a late start, I'd already been in the Army and out by that time. I spent 3 years in the service, and I also was an athlete in college.
Okay.
Yeah, I was on the UCLA fencing team, and so I was also a fencing bum.
There you go.
While I'm doing music, I'm also competitive fencing.
Okay.
I fenced in a couple of national championships, and I have a little medal from one of them.
Congratulations.
And I trained with the Olympians, and I partied with them mostly.
Okay.
I didn't get to go to the Munich Olympics, but I got to party with the guys that went.
Okay.
So, let's see, where am I going now? Where was I? I think I lost my train of thought. So I was at college in a band. I did struggle. People thought I was like crazy to say, okay, well, I'm going to do this now. I'm going to go and be in rock and roll. I said, oh man, forget it. It's not going to happen. It's too hard. And actually it is pretty hard. But, so, I got a kind of a late start.
Sure.
And what I really wanted, what I said to myself, my ambition was that if I could write one good song,
sure,
that would stand the test of time, that maybe people might hear, get to hear, that would make all of that working in dive bars and stuff like that, singing top 40, with places where you had to roll your pant legs up if you wanted to go take a pee in the room, and having bar stools thrown at you and stuff like that. That all that stuff, all the because you get rejected a lot.
Sure.
Nobody, and that's not fun.
No, it's not.
It's not fun to get, have somebody who couldn't carry a tune in a suitcase say, "Well, I don't hear a hit here. I don't, I don't know."
Sure.
Okay.
Well, you put together a few good. I think you put at least more than one good song in your career in music.
That seems to be. That might have been the case of be careful what you wish for. Because I ended up like, oh, okay, 1, maybe 2, 3. Okay,
Yeah. It's
and then that I was satisfied.
Yeah.
Have that kind of burning ambitions that some people have. Like just crank stuff out. For me, it was like, pulling teeth.
Yeah.
Pulling your own teeth actually.
Sure,
Not doing dental work on yourself.
Yeah.
And so it was. I wasn't really prolific either.
Sure.
For that reason, because of the perfectionist part.
Yeah.
Everything had, I couldn't be on Twitter because it would take me half an hour to do how many ever characters they would, I'd spend, a Facebook post, I'll edit it 3 times.
Yeah. But, and I think maybe, the path you took and the musicians of that time took gives you a greater appreciation of the craft and the ability to do it, because nowadays you see all those TV shows on there that provide a super rocket ship to that superstar.
I was just talking to somebody the other night, about the American Idol kind of thing. And I said, well, I can't watch those things because I identify with the losers. Because for sure half of the people that are really artists would, they're not going to be on that show.
Yeah. But you do what you do what you can. The story goes, and I sort of like to hear, if you don't mind repeating it. You run into Billy Hinchy, and who's dating a girl who you're dating the girl's sister.
That's right.
And Billy and his sister sort of push along your music to Carl to hear it, which starts your musical relationship. Meeting him at the time, what was that like to see that part of the Beach Boys already, seeing as he sort of was already in it?
Meeting Billy Hinchy?
Yeah.
The late Billy Hinchy.
Yeah.
I was heartbroken over that. But it was like, Dino, Desi, and Billy. Well, that guy, he had a little Dino Ferrari. He was going to UCLA at the same time also. And he was hot off of his stuff. But, there was a passage of time, between when, we got together and I had actual demos. And he saw me in that bad band that I was talking, in my, just after college and after, where we were doing King of the Road a cappella, at parties, and people, sorority party, and people coming up and say, "Are you guys serious?" But then I actually had some decent demos. I had been signed to a contract by this guy named Jerry Fuller. Jerry Fuller wrote Traveling Man and producer, Little Green Apples and Show and Tell.
Yeah.
The band, the Show and Tell band is basically my ultimate band. Was the people played on Show and Tell. The Fuller heard some of my 4-track, demos, and put me in his 8-track studio at his home, and we did demos with the guys in the Show and Tell band, Rick Littlefield and Dennis Parker. And That's the only Beach Boys style song I ever wrote was for Jerry. Was a demo for Jerry Fuller. A long lonely summer. It's going to be a long lonely summer without you.
Sure.
That was only kind of. I said, well, maybe the Beach Boys might want to do that.
Yeah.
Of course, that's out of the question. And then, of course, all the songs that Long Lonely Summer, It Must Be Love, a couple of other songs like that, that would, like I could crank them out at that time, because I had studio time. I had to do something, and of course, we said, well, maybe he'll get them, placed somewhere. Well, what it turned out, he sold his catalog to CBS, and my stuff was good in it, and it's like often, off in the ether somewhere. Nobody will ever those. I don't even have copies of them. But working with those guys, the Fuller place, then we got into an 8-track studio. It was like studio, wow. Instead of like a TAC 4-track where you had to bounce things back and forth, it was a really process, and then the tape would break. So I had some decent demos, which I think it did include another song of mine called Hot Night in a Cold Town, which was covered by John Mellencamp.
Yeah.
On one of his early albums when he was still John Cooper.
Yeah.
Instead of John.
One of his 1 million names.
Anyhow, so finally, Billy kept after me to take demos to Carl, and I don't waste, because it wasn't my material was not Beach Boys stuff.
Yeah.
It was, very personal and in my style, whatever that that would be. Who's ever going to hear that? But and finally, Billy recruited Annie Wilson, who was then married to Carl. And I said, okay, here, go ahead, and I could not have been more shocked, when they called me and said, oh, he really loves that stuff.
Wow.
Up to the house. That was something. And so then I did, and I said, well, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Well, he wasn't going to cover any of those songs.
Sure.
Liked them a lot, and he wanted to write together, and that's what we did.
I want to.
First time we sat in a room. I've told this story before. We sat in a room, and he's playing the piano, and I said, well, we started to play a little riff, and I said, well, what do you want? What is your idea about this? And he said, oh, yeah, it could be anything. And so that song is out there now.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. I listened to it the other day.
We did the demo. It was basically a demo. We just, I'm shocked that you could get up. Okay, let's go to the studio. So we go over to Brother Recorders, with the engineer and whoa. We no, wait a minute, this song's not even finished really. Let's go and record it, and we did. It was
an interesting moment, I'm sure.
The best night was I'm at home with some friends, and I get a call, and Carl's out at Caribou, and said, "Here, come on out."
Oh.
Come on out to Caribou. Now there was nobody there, and that's where we wrote Going South. That was like Going South is, I think, the best of the work. Actually, it's the one that I said, oh, I think this is the if you look at this song, it sounds a little dated now. I think it would be nice to hear somebody else do it, and I wish somebody would. So I could buy a Tesla or something.
Yeah.
Like Michael Bublé, somebody like that, go ahead and Going South with a nice modern, like updated arrangement.
Sure.
But yeah, and that was a song that actually just bam came out, like in like 15 or 20 minutes,
Sure.
which was for me like just a really unusual thing.
I want to ask you about prior to going to Caribou and prior to recording, I don't know, or recording the demo that you had that's now on YouTube. Your expectations. I know you worked with Carl and the Love Surrounds Me with Dennis, but when you prior to working with, knowing that you're going to work with Carl, your expectations for working with them, were there any high expectations, or was it just I'm just working with this legend?
It was, yeah. Well, yeah, basically that. He was sitting in a room and Carl Wilson is singing at you.
Wow.
How do you top that?
You can't.
It's really hard to top that.
Sure.
It's just, and I'm singing back at him, and he's liking it. That's that. It's hard to say that to anybody that will. It's like bragging, to say that Carl really liked the way I sang.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
Like when we, he was such a sweet guy. I mean, when we went to record Going South, he's, I don't know if I can do it as well as you. Oh yeah, sure, sure.
Well, that's why he's a rare breed.
Pardon me?
I said that's why he's a rare breed of person, because no one else would do that, I don't think.
What a terrible loss.
Yeah.
Poor.
Well, I want to ask you about that part of the group, known that it was rough for the group during those times with their music. They had released 15 big ones, which is Love. They released Love You, then Dennis's solo album, then he had MIU. So a lot of mixed stuff. Dennis's album, pretty good, I would think, in my opinion. But for him to navigate that as the band leader, the musical director of the group, what was your view of him leading the group at that point?
Well, they were somewhat dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Mike was hard. I hardly saw Mike at all during the whole process. I mean, he sang a couple of parts on Angel Come Home and Shortening Bread, and I was never around for like the Sumahama or whatever the name was. I wasn't around for any of that. I mean, I was around for Shortening Bread, and I couldn't figure out what the hell they were doing. And because Brian just loved music.
Sure.
And so for him, he loved Shortening Bread.
Sure.
And one of the other times I got to see Brian in his own little world in that era. He had some people and he was doing a recording in some, I forget where it was, and they were doing Just Like Romeo and Juliet. I don't know if you know that. It's like, and they were going and he was having a great time. But mostly with, Brian was extremely dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So, since they had me do the work on Dennis's song, which was basically the basic track was done.
Yeah. Done
for Bamboo. So I did that for Dennis, and it turned out pretty well. And I had the Carl songs, and I know that Brian liked those songs, because Carl told me he liked them. But so they, they would have loved it if I could have done something with, Brian, but
yeah, he wasn't in the right mindset.
He was not. He would, if I came in the room, he would walk out, and vice versa. He was not having it. So,
and I'm sure in your
but it was like that close,
Well, I'm sure in that situation too, that it's hard to see that for the group, someone who you listened to growing up, and to see this part of the Beach Boys that most fans probably never saw per se, and never thought that could happen. I want to ask you, the scenes that you're a collaborator of the Beach Boys in terms of writing some of their stuff. It's known the success that Brian had with Tony Asher, Pet Sounds, then Van Dyke Parks for Smile, and that was finally released, and I believe it was '04. When you're working, I don't want to say succeeding, but like a presidency, but when you're working with the group that has worked with other people of that nature, is that something that sort of looms over your head in terms of trying to do your best, or is that something where you don't really care about?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't trying to be like Van Dyke Parks, that's for sure. Because I wasn't going to, write anything like Surf's Up. And I don't think anybody else could either. But no, Full Sail might be the only thing where I, said, okay, I'll try to write some kind of a Beach Boys song. Right, we're using their kind of imagery, and basically it was finished. It was finished in the studio because I was having a hard time with it. Trying to work in a style that really wasn't. Trying to put myself into somebody else's style or format. Was. I was uncomfortable with it, but a lot of people like that song. So
sure. Well, and I think that it's tough when you're putting in work and you're putting material that that's good. And Carl or Brian, though two of the greatest singers and performers of anyone's generation, like the music. But then, you're working in an environment which is challenging to do that. And then,
well, there's a lot of pressure, that's for sure.
Oh, I'm sure, because they'd had a string of albums that weren't commercially done well, or people liked them, but vice versa and so forth. I want to ask you about that. You mentioned that in the Surf's Up interview. You're on the album, which nowadays, like many of their work, is more appreciated. But at that time, you have the songs you put together on there, and you had Good Time, and then you mirrored, or not mirrored, but put together with some of the other songs on there that were added, and it's sort of a mix of songs where it's like you had a good album, and then you add some songs that sort of that sort of tamper with it to then lead them to not be able to have a successful album that sort of, I think, takes them away from being the same level as the Beatles or Stones in terms of longevity of greater appreciation. Is that something frustrating at the time to see that?
Well, in general, my opinion and my rule of thumb was if an album had 3 good songs on it, then it was a good album.
Sure.
Most albums, would only have 2 or 3 songs that were really all that good, except for things like Layla or Beatles stuff. I am aware that some people think that the LA Light album is the last good Beach Boys album, and I guess I get a little some credit there.
Yeah. More than just a little.
And in fact, somebody that I've come to know, I don't know if you know who he is, Adam Marsland, who's like a big Beach Boys aficionado and has more knowledge about the Beach Boys than I do, for sure. But he's much younger, and so the LA Light album was his first exposure. So it's like his, and I said, well, holy shit.
Yeah.
It comes as a surprise to me, that. It took, Billy Henschey making me go out to a bar where this guy, Adam Marsland, and his band were doing a tribute to Carl and Dennis and doing their songs. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. People are like, people are still interested in this, or really, really care about it, It comes as quite a surprise to me. Well, look at you. You're just out of college. You're interested in it. That's a shock to me. you look at something like the Surf's Up
Yeah.
podcast. I had never done a pod. Nobody ever talked to me at all.
Wow.
In those days. In fact, some reviewers, there was one review where they thought I was a pseudonym for somebody else. Like I wasn't a real person, because they'd never heard of me, and I came out of nowhere supposedly. But I have to say, going back to the recording, Jim Guercio was way supportive of me.
Yeah.
And to have somebody like that, be that supportive of you. I mean, it was great. In fact, when we did the first Brian Wilson or the Carl Wilson tribute, after he passed away, and I introduced my wife to Guercio, and he says, "Oh, yeah, your husband, he's a real artist." That was like that many years later.
Sure. Well, it makes it all worth it, I'm sure.
It does, yeah, it does. It surprises me that now I have to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Nobody, when it was happening, it was like, yeah, nobody knew who I was. Nobody even seemed to care very much who I was, but.
Well, that's of
course now half of the people are, since I'm of a certain age, and some of those people aren't around anymore. Who are you going to go to?
Sure. Well, I think that just speaks to the marvel of the Beach Boys and the music that they've created. There's so much stuff that they expect the baseline surf and get the beach and the summer stuff that they don't realize the other material, the gems and the other amazing songs that they have in there to provide to people, regardless of the album. They have Surf's Up, and now they had the Feel Flows box set that they just released with Sunflower, probably besides Pet Sounds, one of their greatest albums that they put out with Surf's Up. I would like to see, and I'll ask you this, I would like to see something from the period of LA Light album to see other material that's unreleased. Did you write any besides the ones that are on the album? Did you write any other material with them?
Nope, that's it.
Just those songs? Yeah,
that's it. I was surprised when it could be anything surfaced on the internet.
I listened to that
one.
Well,
a lot of it had to do with the dysfunction.
Sure, yeah. They don't want to, have it super blow up because then Carl ends up leaving a year or two later after that for his solo tour. Dennis was, almost had a solo tour, and he should have had that, but as the story is known, that his life path was on a different note.
It had a different arc.
Yes.
I mean, actually, like it was on a different angle. Actually,
yeah.
There was no arc to it. It was like down.
Yeah,
He's a nice guy. I mean,
yeah.
But as Billy and Carl would say, he's a bit dramatic.
Yes. At that point, after you had worked with the Beach Boys, and then your song went with John Mellencamp and on his album before he really took off. You mentioned it, how strenuous writing is or music is for you to create and write songs. At what point after that did you sort of say, okay, this is good for me, this is what I wanted to accomplish?
Well, I had a band that played around town, and who played at all the sort of punk or new wave clubs all around Los Angeles. And I had a nice following and stuff like that, as a singer, fronting a band. And we were doing just fine, and we actually opened for Mellencamp on the night that John Lennon was killed. So that was really strange, because we had to play at the Whiskey A Go-Go the next night.
Sure.
Well, the 4 people showed up, and
yeah.
One of the band members was drunk. The other was pissed because he had to show up for this show. Instead of doing a session with Aretha Franklin, for which you would have got double scale instead of basically nothing at the Whiskey Go-Go. And I just, you know,
Yeah.
it was depressing.
Sure. I'm sure that was sad and tough to deal with that and see that on that night.
I mean, I did have an offer to sign a record deal with a Japanese company. I could have gone over. I could have gone over to Japan and, you know, been a pop star in Japan for sure. But
Sure.
you know, I was riding high because I had the Beach Boys and
Sure.
the stuff, and you know, I'll stay here. I'm gonna be, you know, I don't need to do that.
I'm curious, you know, Beach Boys, you know, doing anything with them for that matter, regardless of how long it was and how much it was, that is a feat in itself that most don't get to experience. And then
Oh yeah,
the success you had, you know, with your song with John Mellencamp and how well he did, that's a whole nother level of, I'm sure, appreciation for yourself. How much in terms of, you know, being on that mountaintop, looking down and being able to take a breather of all the work.
Well, you know, I mean, I can always trot it out.
Yeah.
You know, I can always say, well, you can hear me singing on a Beach Boys record. And that pretty much, that, you know, that's my entree. Yeah, I wrote some songs. I wrote some songs for the Beach Boys. Oh, you know, and then it's, you know, it's my cachet, you know, I suppose, you know, my entree. And I still, what the hell? Yeah, that really happened. You know,
Yeah.
it's strange. I mean, you know, when I sang on the Beach Boys record, you know, I mean, I did a ooh and ah, and you know, okay, that's, you know, you're singing backgrounds with the Beach Boys. They just gave me like one note, you know. And that was about, you know, I wasn't, you know, and I tended to gravitate towards the melody in any case. I said, hold on, do that again, you know. But they were so good. I mean, at harmonizing, it was just a revelation. I mean, you knew they were good, but to see them just bam like that, you know, fall right into, you know, harmonizing, it was pretty impressive. Just nice to boom.
Sure. And speaking of harmonizing, I still, when I went to go see Al's show a few months ago in October, I think it was, October in Connecticut, I had told my father, and he was amazed by it, that Carl starting in the Beach Boys at 15 years old, as a freshman or sophomore in high school, it's just like, you know, you can't find that anywhere else with this guy. And for 30 years, almost 40 years, he maintained, if not improved, his vocal ability as a singer.
Yeah, well, he was a fantastic singer, no doubt about it. He could sing anything. And you know, even you know, Carl and I would go places, and you know, I said, we'll go to this record store, and nobody's gonna bother, you know, nobody's gonna recognize you. Oh no,
Yeah.
Oh no, you know, and that was how I got like. You know, my understanding of how celebrities, their life is like not totally their own. You know, people, you know, going through an airport with them is like, you know, there's Carl Wilk. You know, people would come up to him, and you know, that always surprised me.
Sure, and even you know, throughout the years as they got older, still the love, and there's still love. I mean, you see it on Facebook. All the people groups that people create for them, and people are still going to the concerts and still buying the albums. It's still, you know, unbelievable. And as I mentioned earlier on the beginning, when Fred Vela mentioned the dropping popularity of the Beach Boys, you see not the Stones, the Beatles, they die after 6 years, and 60 years later, the Beach Boys stuff is still here. They're still popular, and you're still getting new fans. So you definitely have the ability to look back and say, man, I don't know how I did this with them, but to be strapped on this rocket with them for as long as I was.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it was, you know, it was fun.
Yeah.
it was fun to be cool. It was fun to be the cool kid in the room, you know,
Sure.
like.
Well, it's always a good thing to use as a one-upper when you're talking to someone when they brag about some new job they got. You say, "Well, last time I checked, I wrote with the Beach Boys," and you didn't. I
was a singer, yeah, and let's see, one of my biggest fans was Carl Wilson, was like a really big fan, you know. I mean,
you can say
I kept some recordings, but of course I didn't.
You can say to fans, you may have this job as a big time doctor, working in Washington, but does Brian Wilson like your work? I don't know about that. One of the greatest songwriters in the world and producers in the world likes my stuff. Before we go here, before we end here, and again, I thank you for doing this. I want to end on a little segment called the One Word Challenge. So what I do is I throw out a few names of places, people, or things that has something to do with you, and you have to do your best to say a word or two that best comes to mind when you hear it. So you ready?
Sure.
Pleasantville, New York.
Hometown.
Vietnam.
Well, oh gosh, I just one word.
Yeah.
Complicated, extremely complicated.
Carl Wilson.
Not a word.
Carl Wilson.
Carl Wilson, a beautiful person.
James Guercio.
Supportive.
The Beach Boys.
One of the greats.
Songwriting.
Hard.
And last but certainly not least, Geoffrey Cushing Murray.
Well, he's sort of a character.
Well, I would also add a very talented man, a man who definitely inspires others with the songs that he produced for the group, which I wish they played more at their concerts, but I'm glad that it's able to be listened to on whatever platform you choose. Well, Geoffrey, I want to thank you again for taking the time to do this, to set some time aside to talk about an album that holds a lot of meaning to myself and others. It means.
Well, I'm shocked. I'm surprised, that it still reaches out, and I wish Carl was here to hear that.
Sure. Well, I hope that it continues to go on, and that one day the songs that you originally wrote that you'll no longer have come to the light of day to listen to them, and that the song, the demo you wrote with Carl at the way beginning, get some big time play somewhere. As I always say to everyone out there, if you enjoyed this, because why the heck wouldn't you enjoy this with talking to the legendary man himself, Geoffrey Cushing Murray, do us a favor, subscribe, like, comment, share.
Legendary. Geoffrey Cushing Murray, legendary.
Yes.
I'm going to tell my wife that.
Yes. Everyone out there who enjoyed this, like, comment, subscribe, comment, share, all that fun jazz online, wherever you listen to or view this. Follow on social media, Twitter, Nolan Carr Night Show, and on Instagram, Nolan Carr Night. And in the words of Johnny Carson, I bid you all heartfelt tonight. Good night until we see each other again. Take care.